Okay, let's talk about something we all pretty much take for granted. Oxygen. I mean, it's the very definition of life, right? You breathe it in, it fuels every single cell in your body. It just seems so simple, so fundamental.
And you know, from the very beginning, right after it was discovered, oxygen became totally synonymous with survival. Think about that classic experiment by Joseph Priestley. He puts a mouse in a sealed jar and, well, it doesn't make it. But then he tries again, this time adding a mint plant to the jar. And what happens? The mouse lives. This one experiment pretty much cemented this core idea in everyone's mind. Oxygen is life.
But what if it isn't always? What if, for the most fragile humans on the planet, there can actually be too much of a good thing? This is where we get to the heart of the paradox. Because for the tiniest, most vulnerable patients, we're talking premature infants, this life-giving gas can also be a devastating poison. And for decades, medicine has been wrestling with this absolutely terrifying reality.
So we're heading into this story of a terrible trade-off. And you have to understand, this impossible choice wasn't born from some medical mistake. It actually came from the very best of intentions. To really get why doctors face this dilemma today, we have to rewind the clock a bit.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1940s. Doctors figure out that giving high concentrations of oxygen to preemies helps stop these really dangerous pauses in their breathing. It looks like a miracle, right? A total game changer. But at the exact same time, a new, completely mysterious disease starts popping up. Babies are going blind. It took until the 1950s for the first big medical trials to connect the dots. And the culprit? You guessed it. The high levels of oxygen. This was the discovery of what we now call retinopathy of prematurity, or ROP. And this is where the horrifying choice really comes into focus. Those first trials laid it out in the starkest possible terms. When they restricted oxygen, guess what? The rates of blindness plummeted. Great news. But the number of deaths went up. So you could save a baby's sight, but it seemed to increase their risk of dying. I mean, can you imagine? What an absolutely agonizing trade-off to have to make.
And for the next 50 years, this dilemma basically haunted neonatal medicine. Bill Silverman, who's known as the father of modern neonatology, he didn't mince words. He said it bluntly. Doctors were flying completely blind. They knew too much oxygen was dangerous, and they knew too little was fatal. But nobody, and I mean nobody, knew where that perfect, just right Goldilocks zone was.
So, if you're faced with an impossible equation, what do? Well, in the 21st century, the medical world decided to throw everything they had at it. A massive, global research effort to finally, hopefully, solve this thing. So researchers from all over the planet collaborated on this huge project called the NEOPROM meta-analysis. We're talking 5 massive trials involving nearly 5,000 of the most fragile infants you can imagine. And they all had one big question. What is the right oxygen target? They decided to compare a lower oxygen saturation target, that's between 85 and 89%, to a higher one, from 91 to 95%, to finally get a clear answer.
All right, so the results start rolling in. And the first piece of the puzzle? It looked like a total breakthrough. The data was crystal clear. Keeping babies in that lower oxygen range slashed the risk of severe, sight-threatening ROP by a whopping 28%. Now, to put that in perspective, that means for every 25 babies treated this way, 1 case of severe blindness was prevented. That's huge.
But then comes the other shoe. The old trade-off? It was still there. Those exact same lower oxygen targets that saved sight were linked to a 16% higher risk of death. The modern data just confirmed the historical dilemma. It felt like they were right back where they started. Saving sight seemed to come at the cost of life itself.
And if that wasn't complicated enough, there was another completely unexpected finding. Those lower oxygen levels, they were also linked to a 24% higher risk of this devastating and often fatal intestinal disease called necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC. So suddenly, the equation wasn't just complex anymore, it was even more fraught with impossible choices.
Okay, so we have all this data, right? These percentages, these trade-offs. But what does it actually feel like to try and manage this impossible equation for one single baby in the middle of a chaotic neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU?
Well, let's just consider the reality of the NICU for a second. Research from Dr. Wendy Tempson found something staggering. For a single premature infant, an alarm goes off, on average, once every 8 minutes. Think about that. That's 177 alarms per patient per day. It creates this constant risk of what's called alarm fatigue. That's the point where the staff just becomes dangerously desensitized to all the noise. They start to tune it out.
And hitting that perfect, narrow oxygen target, it's not just about turning a dial on a machine. It's about people. It's about the nurses at the bedside. A study by David Sink showed this incredibly direct link between nurse staffing and oxygen control. Look at this. When one nurse had to care for 3 babies, those infants spent over a third of their time in a dangerously high oxygen range. But with one-on-one care, that number drops all the way down to just 8%. The human factor isn't just important, it's absolutely critical.
And of course, we can never forget the families. For parents sitting by that incubator, this isn't data, it isn't a chart. As one family member put it so powerfully, it's a relentless orchestra of alarms, a constant, terrifying soundtrack reminding them just how fragile their child's life is in that moment.
So, if the hard data reveals this terrible trade-off and the human reality is this complex, where on earth do we go from here? Well, the search for just right is far from over.
So what's the path forward? Well, it's not about finding one single magic number that fits every baby. It's about building a smarter, more humane system. It means using technology not to replace our amazing clinicians, but to empower them. We're talking smarter alarms that cut down on that fatigue, and automated systems that can help expert nurses do their critical work even better. It also means recognizing that the right trade-off might be different from one hospital to another. And maybe most importantly, it means designing this entire system of care around the families who are right at the center of this storm.
Which leaves us with this incredibly profound question. How do we balance saving sight against saving a life when the answer seems to change with every single tiny patient? The oxygen paradox isn't solved, not by a long shot. It's a constant, delicate balancing act being performed every second of every day in NICUs all over the world. And it's a powerful reminder that sometimes in medicine, the simplest truths are the most complicated of all.